Hi, Zachary. I tried to record this earlier and I posted it as a private video because, I don't want the world to see it, but I can't find it after I did that. So I'm going to post this as public and I'll just take it down in a day or so. All right. So I think you want to begin always in a poem by looking at the title. And I think something that's interesting here is when I did my research, the Graubaul Man was normally just titled Graubaul Man, and he adds the definite article, the, kind of setting it out, almost making it like, the Graubaul Man. So it kind of adds some, it emphasizes that this is the one, this is the figure found in the peat moss. And you asked me what I thought the theme of the poem was. And one thing, there's a couple different themes that I think you could choose to be the main theme of your writing. The one that I think that it talks about the inevitability of death. No matter how well you are remembered or one is remembered, death and decay are inevitable. And even though the Graubaul Man has been well preserved, there are still signs of change and decay, and indeed he is not a human. And I think that this idea of the inevitability of death uh, and our willingness to resist it are shown through the poem in first that Haney uses a lot of natural imagery to help us picture this body, and at once this makes Haney's descriptions kind of detached because he's not using the language of a human description to describe the Graubaul Man. Instead, he's using a lot of flora and some kind of elements of nature that are, not all that evolved, if you want to use that language, like we've got a snail or a mollusk or something like that earlier on, and an eel. We don't have a bear or a horse or anything. They're all these kind of like lower level animals and these elements in botany that are used to help us picture the man, which kind of creates like this detached view of the man in the first six stanzas. But by the seventh stanza, we have a real strong shift when he talks about how he remembers him in his childhood, and he uses the language of a dead baby to explain it. So we have this, it just occurred to me, we go from, flora to um, kind of like small little biological animals, and then we get to a baby, and it's kind of this idea that we all come from the earth and will return from the earth, no matter how well our memory or whatever is preserved. Another theme you could choose to discuss was just the violence of life, and there's several layers that this theme shows up in. Of course, in the death of the Graubaul Man, and how there's some indications that he suffered great violence here, even in the allusion to the dying Gaul at the end. This idea of he was killed by somebody, so somebody found him to be an enemy, but if he was an enemy to somebody, then somebody else probably found him to be a hero, similar to the Dying Gaul. And if you haven't taken a look at the statue, the Dying Gaul, I would take a look at that. It dates earlier than the Graubaul Man because the original statue is Greek, and the one that you'll be able to see a picture of is a Roman copy because the Greek ones are made in bronze, and so we don't have those. We have a lot of these marble copies of most of those types of statues. Um, Another theme that you could choose to develop your essay on is this idea of memorialization, or what's the word for that? When you sustain something, you save, so preservation. That's the word, preservation. And I think memorialization is connected to preservation. And obviously, the Graubaul Man has been preserved. His body has been preserved, but yet there's nothing inside. So try as we will, nature or humans, as we try to preserve things, it is impossible to maintain something in its original state. And then you also have the poem functions as an agent of preservation, as a way to memorialize for the reader. We read this poem and we're like, oh, and the poem functions to memorialize not just the finding of the Graubaul Man, but Seamus Haney's interaction with the Graubaul Man. Okay, I would take some time, if I could, to locate the historic context of the poem, not the poem's content. The poem's content, is BC, but the historical content of the point of publication and what was going on in Ulster. I know there was some violence. It would be very hard to find some violence going on in Ireland. So you can find that. Okay. All right. Now, so those are three themes you could use: impulse to memorialize or to preserve, just general violence, the violence of growing older, the violence of whatever slit the Grubble man's throat, the violence the um, of nature, actually being part of the cycle of life and death. Um, I think the poem could be about the tension between what does it mean to be alive and what does it mean to be dead. Any of those themes would work, and you'll find a lot of things to fit under it. I hope you saw the sample that I sent you. All right, so the poem begins with as if he had been poured in tar, and it gives us an image right away. Of course, tar, if you put something in tar, it would, because it's a fluid, a liquid, its volume would not change, but it takes the shape of what's around it. According to our understanding of states of matter, the liquid would take the shape of what's around it. So you have this sense that that's what his body looks like. It looks like it's been all inside this space. And he uses that, and he begins with the subordinate conjunction, which I find interesting because it creates this whole stanza becomes a periodic sentence, which delays the reader. We don't get to find out as if what until right here. He lies on the black river of himself. So it's interesting construction there. Lies just occurred to me. This idea, I think there's a lot of words in this poem that the diction does double time, and lies, of course, can mean a reclining position, and lies can also mean to misrepresent the truth. So his body looks like it's an alive person. Its body has the semblance of not having been dead that long, but that's a lie. Okay, so its body is lying as if poured in a reclining position, but his body is also lying in another way. I think you can see some other instances where words are doing double time like that. On the pillow of turf, so here we have the first reference to him being part of nature, and his body seems to weep. There's kind of this personifying of the dead body, making this dead person weep, ascribes to it human qualities. At the same time, we've used nature kind of in a detached, non-human way to explain him. We use the idea of weeping, a body weeping, to personify. Personification is lifelike qualities attributed to anything inanimate, so a dead body would certainly be that way. And then the black river of himself, he seems to weep this. I think we can look at this word river and think about water often symbolizing life. Water also often symbolizes the passing of time. Okay, so we'll use water both of those ways. And if you could go to any dictionary of symbolism and find both of those if you needed to back that up. And then I think when we look at but it's not a river of life here. It's a black river. It's a river of death. So at once coming out of this body, it seems to be memories of its life, but that life couldn't be sustained, so it's black. Also, I want you to notice in this poem the poetic technique of enjambment. There is no period or comma at the end of the first 4 lines. This is called enjambment when the grammar and the sense returns to the next line. You have to keep going as if he had been poured in tar. You have to keep going. If you pause here, it's going to be funky. As if he had been poured in tar, he lies on a pillow. That's not a good reading, right? So in enjambment, you have to continue on. However, when you get to this line right here, we have an end stopped line. So it is stopped. So there's a greater pause. It imposes this moment of structure on the poem. And I really like this part right here because if you read it, it goes like this. Your mind's eye, your eye's going to go like that. We are kind of pouring through the poem. Our eyes are kind of pouring through the poem. There's kind of the sense of mimetic syntax, that the context, the way that the lines are organized, reflects the sense of this bit. Okay, and then we go to the next, a natural image that helps us to picture this body. The grain of his wrist is like bog oak. So you want to know that bog oak. Okay, first, oak is a really strong wood, period. Okay, that signifies this man's strength, but this is bog oak. So it's been grown in the peat, and it might be petrified. The other thing I think about oak is when you cut a tree, you have those circles to tell the age. It's kind of, you can't know the life of a tree until you kill it, and then you know how long it is. So it's the tree itself kind of shows that intersection between life and death. And I think when you have right here the bog oak being compared to the wrist become kind of, again, this place of life and death. The grain of his wrist, perhaps, like I think of how these wrinkles will get really pronounced, reflecting the circles that you would find inside an oak tree. And he's like a tree, and he's also like a basalt egg, which is a stone. So even though he's human, he's not human. He's like an oak. He's like a rock. So there's this idea of what is life, what is death, what is human, what is nature. His instep is shrunk, cold as a swan's foot. It makes me think kind of like a maple leaf. That image helps us to see how the skin, the desiccation has pulled the skin in, or a wet swamp root. Again, nature, nature. Okay. His hips are the ridge and purse of a muscle. Okay. So you want to think about his hips having that ridge to them, and the purse maybe being where you can keep something inside. Okay. Purse also means to go like this. So think about what those images are working. His spine and eel rested under a glisten of mud. And this is almost like a positive word. His spine and eel arrested, slowed down, stopped. And so this kind of works, this word works with this idea of preservation. Arrested, you've heard that movie or that show Arrested Development. It's slowed down, it's stopped, it's preserved. So his spine and eel arrested under a glisten of mud. And their nature is almost painted more positively. It glistens than the bogman himself. The head lifts, the chin is a visor raised above the vent of his slashed throat. So the head, there's movement there, but the chin becomes something inanimate, a visor. So blocking the sun is what I think of, but it's also kind of shows that his chin is pronounced. But then this word of his slashed throat is the first concrete indication that we get of the violence enacted upon this man. And slashed is a very violent word. If I were writing about this, I would say they didn't say his throat was cut or his throat was severed or that he died from bleeding or something like that. But they use this verb denotes the violence, connotes the violence that went along with his death. And his throat, his very lifeline, that has tanned and toughened. So raised above the vent, and so the very part where he was cut has tanned and toughened. So this very fragile and vulnerable wound hasn't remained so. It's tan and tough now. So he has undergone this process. I think another word you want to pay attention to is this one. The cured wound opens inward to a dark elderberry place. I love the word cured here, like lie. I think it does double duty here. Cured means meat that's, like had salt or whatever applied to it to make it a preservative, to make it last, this idea of preservation again. But cured also means made better. And just like earlier we talked about things that could not, as much as we tried to preserve his body, it's still full of this empty cavern of berries, right? But same way here, we cured the cured wound. So there's this idea that the play of trying to sustain life, but it's impossible. And also cured, what has he been prepared for? What has he been preserved for, as far as using that word in its preservative sense? He's been preserved for the reader. He's been preserved for the person who sees the image. So we are the recipient of this impulse to preserve. Okay. Then this is a real shift right here in the poem. You want to note this. It goes from this first part really describing what the body looks like, and now we've moved into commentary about that. So it's almost an inward shift from this part describing the externals of the body to this part describing the internals of the poet himself. And he begins with a rhetorical question that is in anticipation of an audience, like, who will say corpse? Okay, and he invites us to think with him in that rhetorical question. And if we say, I will, then it almost is like he anticipates that response. And he says, but then who will say body? So is he a corpse, which is the word we use to describe a dead body? Or is he a body, which is the word we use to describe the same set of muscles and bones and everything else, the same set of skin, muscles, and bones? We call it corpse if it's dead and body if it's alive. So this stanza to me is really important because it really draws out this idea of the connectedness of life and death, okay, and how they might look the same but be very different, but and maybe they're both unavoidable. And his rustic hair, a matte on likely as a photis's, and this could be archaic spelling of fetus. Photis could also be kind of a fetus that was growing and grew wrongly. A baby that ends up being malformed within the womb, like maybe having like extra arms or hair. I look it up. It's kind of an odd definition. I'm thinking Haney probably meant the fetus here, but you could play with both the meanings of both of these words. We talked about this part with a forceps baby and the image that it uses, but again, it's this sense of life and death. A baby's entry into the world is the beginning of life, but this photis isn't going to survive, okay? Then the shift, but now he lies perfected in my memory. The dying Gaul, make sure you get a chance to look at that sculpture. on his shield with the active weight of each hooded victim slashed and dumped, and it ends on that note of violence. Probably so the